Come on through, everyone. Come on in. Make room in case there's anyone else. Hello, good evening. Welcome. Thank you, Dion Minnie. Appreciate you being here playing for us. Who's got the feedback? That wasn't me. That wasn't me. Welcome. Thank you for being here. You know, one of my pet peeves is when someone says, "Here's a man that needs no introduction." But frankly, here's a man that needs no introduction. But in case you don't know me, I'm Mike Faith. This is my home. I've written 0 best-selling books. I've never written a book. And Malcolm, thanks very much for being here.
No.
Nashville regular.
I am. I've been here many times over the years. And I always lament whenever I leave that I don't live here. So.
There's property for sale.
There's room for 3 or 4 more people in Nashville. Yeah. We can squeeze you in.
I'm like I'll be the last person in America to move here. Everyone's streaming in.
Yeah. So we got some things in common. We grew up 12 miles apart. You're in Fairham, I was Southampton.
Oh, right, I forgot that. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we were just a few months apart in birth. We both went to, if the Wikipedia is true, Above Bar Church for a while.
That's true. Oh my goodness, you went to Above Bar?
Yeah, Above Bar on Spring Road Evangelical.
Yeah, so that's where our parents.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'm so glad my favourite neighbour came.
You know the guy who runs TED, Chris Anderson,
of course,
is the son of the former pastor of Above Bar.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow, what a weird circle we've just established.
Yeah.
Okay, fascinating. So, and then we both left the UK and ended up in different continents, and that's kind of where the similarities stop. Because you've written 6 best-selling books.
Soon to be 7.
And I've written 0. You're super successful. I kind of hang out here. I could never get this many friends in a room on a Monday night. They're not here because of me. They're here because of you.
I don't believe that.
But a lot of people here are entrepreneurs, and as entrepreneurs, we're fascinated with success, and we often think that we've worked out the formula. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if we worked out the formula or we got lucky because we tried and we were perhaps naive to the difficulty of the circumstances, so we did it anyway. And if enough people try, some succeed. But your own thoughts on success, and perhaps if there's one thing that's been your key to success, what would it have been?
Well, I guess on the first thing about success, I always feel like before you go any further, you need to define what that word means to you. Because one of my pet peeves is that people, particularly in this culture, define success so narrowly. They define it in terms of how much money you make, which, you know, if you told me that I would make 1/10 of the money I make next year, I wouldn't change a thing about what I do. I mean, I would be a little
because it's a big number to begin with.
But I mean, I would be mildly, you know, I would have some degree of disappointment. But I mean, I don't do what I do. I don't measure my success in terms of how much money I make. I have 10 measures of success, and they're not the same for all of us. And so it's really important before you know, in Outliers, I had a notion that success is where you're in a job where you have some degree of autonomy, where the work is difficult, hard enough to engage your mind, and where there's a relationship between effort and reward. And by that measure, you know, a kindergarten teacher can consider himself or herself to be a huge success, right? It's certainly hard. As long as the organization recognizes that they're good and they're working hard and rewards them appropriately, and gives them some kind of freedom in how they want to work with their kids, that person has hit a home run. So I prefer that sort of, and I have often felt that the reason for my kind of economic success as a writer is that I never intended to be economically successful. I always pursued other things, and that turns out to be the fastest route to kind of having the marketplace recognize it.
Totally. You know, there's one of the podcasts that you introduced. It was something, the happiness syndrome, and it talked about gold, silver, and bronze medalists. And the silver medalist is unhappy because they didn't reach the gold position. And I would say you've reached the gold position in writing and being an author. And I'm going to challenge, if I may, if you were earned a tenth of the amount, do you think maybe you'd feel you had the silver position and perhaps wouldn't be happy, or you think, no, you'd have the gold position?
No, because the things that make me happy would remain the same. I mean, the discovery of new ideas, the expressing myself. You know, I don't require a large audience in order to feel satisfied. I just require an engaged and satisfied audience.
Half of you can leave now. It's okay.
So I don't, although I have this is a totally idiosyncratic thought. When I was a kid, I was a runner. I still run, but I was a competitive runner as a kid. And I've noticed this fascinating thing, which is that the people who were the absolute best at the age of, in their teenage years, remained in the world of running. They're all still the coaches, or they were people who were second best went on to do extraordinary things in the world. Like, they were the ones who became, successful entrepreneurs, or like successful doctors or writers, whatever. And I've often marveled about that so it was actually a disadvantage to be the best in your teenage years, because you got trapped in what is ultimately a narrow world. But if you were second best, you got all the benefits of participating in the sport, but you didn't feel like you were beholden to it and had to kind of cling to it. You were free to reinvent yourself once you realized you had maxed out. There's part of me that says sometimes, though, not being the winner in a given field can be an enormous advantage, because excellence is a little bit of a trap sometimes. And I've often thought about that, particularly, many of you are entrepreneurs, and I'm sure that many of you are not on your first entrepreneurial activity. And being, if you're on your second or your third, the first two failures were probably enormously instructive and probably helped you way more.
Painful.
Yeah.
But that's how entrepreneurs learn, I think. I mean, I'd imagine you've worked hard and you've studied and you've made incremental and transformational progressions in your career. And I think as entrepreneurs, we're not always that smart. We just do it. So we fail and we fail, and then we succeed, and then we fail and we succeed. And the ratio gets better as we get older, but that tends to be our modicum.
Yeah.
At least for me, anyway. Perhaps,
So this is super interesting. I've often thought that, suppose we were to sit down and design an educational system based on entrepreneurial principles. One of the first things that we would do is we would say, so it's quite possible that you learn more from a failure than a success, right? So let's have an educational system that makes it possible for kids to productively fail. What does that mean? Well, one of the things that means is to encourage kids to pursue ideas, subjects, whatever, where they're not good. So if you're not a good writer, let's make you take a writing class. If you're not mathematical, let's say take calculus. If you fail, it's fine, but in the process of trying to grasp something that you're not well suited for, you may learn so many other things that have downstream value. It's sort of crazy to me that we have a system that right from the get-go tries to forces kids to very quickly identify what they're good at and exclusively puts them in that. And a 12-year-old daughter of a friend of mine told me that she wasn't good at math, and my heart broke. I was like, first of all, who cares? Secondly, how do you know? You're 12. You're not math yet, right? And third, that's all the more reason to take it. But to do that, you need a world that doesn't judge her for failing.
Sure, of course.
Rather says, maybe there's something useful that could come out of this.
Yeah. So let's think about the world and how we change it. So let's just say one of the other things in common is neither of us can be US president.
That's right.
As of today.
Yeah.
So let's just say tomorrow the rules change.
Yeah.
You and I can run.
Uh-huh.
It's going to be close, I want you to know. maybe I win the popular vote, but you get the electoral.
You have the English accent. You have the English accent. You have a massive advantage over me because that just reads as sophisticated and.
You're very charming. I think that's the advantage. But anyway, the story is you win.
Yeah.
You're president of the US.
Yeah.
What's our priorities? What are we going to change?
Oh, so interesting. Well, one thing I would say is that I would, the best thing about this, so the best thing about this country is it's really big. And there are lots and lots of different people in it. And so it seems silly to me to try and centralize a lot of decisions. One of the first things I would try and do is to reestablish the notion of federalism, which is that the notion that individual states ought to have some, and cities ought to have greater autonomy over how they, so communities ought to have some autonomy about the kinds of communities they construct. And that's not, that doesn't undermine the American dream, that is in support of the American dream. New York ought to feel different from Arkansas, and there's nothing wrong with that. And New Yorkers shouldn't beat up on Arkansans, and Arkansans shouldn't beat up on New Yorkers for their differences. They should celebrate them. So that would be the first thing I would do.
Yes.
And then what else would I do? I also just think I would try and take steps to attract a different kind of person into public life. Public life ought to be a noble calling and not something that we dread. And part of that is solving, like one of the most distressing things I heard about what it means to be a congressman, for example, Congress representative, is that you spend all of your time fundraising. And that sort of broke my heart. That's not what you should be doing. You should be focused on learning about what the problems are and how to solve them. So this sounds like a really dumb, kind of trivial thing, but I would sort of do what other countries do and have public funding of electoral campaigns. You shouldn't, the government, like in Canada, there's both limits on how much you can spend and a lot of public money is given to you to help you run.
Yeah.
So if you're, I was joking with my mom when I saw her, who was 89 years old, who lives in Canada. And I was saying to her, she should really run for office. And it's sort of a joke because she's 89, she has no interest in running for office. But in Canada, if you're an 89-year-old retired therapist living in, small house in whatever, you can actually run for office. She could actually, if she wanted to, get elected. That couldn't happen here. And that's sort of a shame because, as I explained to my mom, she'd be a really, really good member of parliament. She really would.
But when you say it couldn't happen here, I mean, one of the beauties in the US is kind of anyone can be president. It's one of the problems.
It's the money part is. Yeah. I think the you can do it, but you need to have access to so many resources that it effectively excludes a class of people who I think, why are there are a lot of people who are in Congress tend to be people from the wealthier professions or wealthier backgrounds, and I have nothing against that. But I would like to see their numbers supplemented. There should be a lot of pastors and a lot of school teachers and a lot of, these are people who have enormously useful things to add to the political conversation.
So elections, Canada, it's election day today.
And
you're here. Thank you for being here when on election day in Canada. Yeah. Trudeau, will he win? Would you like him to win?
I would like him to win, but the thing is, I don't think that Canadian politics is not nearly as polarized as here, so if he were not to win, and the Tories were to win, I still think Canada will be fine. They're not going to overturn, the thing that makes Canada great. You should be, in a properly functioning democracy, you should find a way to be happy with whoever wins. And if you can't bring yourself to be, there's either something wrong with you or something wrong with the democracy that you're in.
Make Canada great again. Okay, books, podcasts, revisionist history. Do you have an idea germinating for a year? One day do you have an idea and that's it and you start working on it? What's your process?
Well, it's more like desperation. I have to do 10 revisionist histories a year, 40 minutes each. That's 6 months, 7 months of work. And the ideas have to be really good to make someone listen for 40 minutes. So I am now in that desperation. This morning, as I sat in my East Nashville coffee shop, I was fretting about the utter lack of good ideas I have for fifth season. But actually, it's a lovely thing. That's the best kind of anxiety. And doing podcasts are, it is, for someone who's spent his entire life in organized media, they are such an extraordinary thing. Everything is different about them. The structure of the industry is like wide open. It's frictionless contact with communication with your audience. The economics of it are crazy. The top 5% of the podcast, or top 1%, are making staggering. Do you know how much money Joe Rogan makes? He sits down and talks to like one person a week for an hour and a half, and I'm gonna guess he makes $25 million a year. That's just like weird. Like a guy I mean, he's really good at what he does. Like, but just like, and the money just like literally a truck backs up, and they just like pile cash. Like, it's amazing. So that's like, and the kind of, the thing that with talking to strangers, I did an audiobook, and I did the audiobook like a podcast, and you listen to it. It's all a tape. So it's not just me reading it. I've got theme music. I've used all the interview tape. It's set up so it's incredibly like an immersive. It took us months to do, and took us. Usually, you do an audiobook in 3 days, and it costs $10,000. We took 4 months, and it cost $200,000. It is now outselling the physical book 2 to 1, which has almost never happened.
It is amazing how you did the quotes in it.
Oh yeah, it's like
love that.
It's an intense. But what's happened is that everyone who listened to my podcast is like, oh, I'm just going to listen to the book. It's not cannibalizing physical book sales. It's an entirely new group of people. Now they're got, you're an ears man. The world of ears is right? You're an ears man. You know what ears are like this thing. We weren't even thinking about this. 5 years ago, if you went to if you were a publisher, you literally gave away the audio rights. You didn't even think about it. Wow. Now, it's the opposite. If I was to write another book, I would withhold the audio rights, which I would think is the most valuable thing, and then I would use the audiobook to sell the physical book to whoever wanted it. Print rights, would be an afterthought.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's like flipped.
So you say that sometimes you're wondering what your next podcast is or book. I mean, I would have thought it would almost be annoying if people say, I've got a great idea for a book. I mean, don't you find that all the time? Isn't that annoying?
No, not annoying.
You actually like that? Because you're going to have 40 ideas in a minute.
No. The thing you have to understand is that it's incredibly useful when people do that. But most of the time, it's not the idea itself. When someone comes and says, I have a great idea, they give you an idea. You almost never use that idea. But what happens is, that idea leads to something really useful. You think about it, and you're like, oh. And then you go and move, and then you end up in a place you never would have ended up before. So other people's experience is incredibly important. Yes. Because all of us in this room, we're one big Venn diagram. We all have areas where we overlap. But most of us have huge areas. You don't even know, most people are not aware of the things that they know that I don't. Right? All of us assume that what we know, everyone knows. So not true. You have a million things that only you know. And if I can get those, even 10 of those things out of you, I am so much, that's my job. Right? That's how I make my living, is figuring out those things that you didn't realize were interesting. Okay, well, we're going to get a few ideas from people in a minute. I know there's some in the room, but just a moment on talking to strangers. And I'm sorry, the interrogation lamp keeps wandering. How long does it take to write Talking to Strangers? How long did it take you? What was start to finish? Well, I was doing my podcast takes 7 months a year, so I have 5 months left over to do other things. So I was doing it 5 months a year for 4 years, maybe. which took long, because of that, it took longer, this was longer between books than in the past. But I feel there's no reason. For a while, I had this obsession with turning out a book every 4 years, or 3 years, and then I realized why. Like, it's not like people forget about you, they're still happy. I have authors I love, and they haven't come out with a book in, Shakespeare hasn't come out with anything. I'm not like, where is his next play? Like, I'm about to get up on this. No, I'm actually quite happy.
And the original concept, I mean, were you were walking through Central Park one day and a stranger spoke to you and you said, I'm going to write the book? Or
No.
What was
the original? It was because I'm obsessed with spies and spy novels and spy stories. And I stumbled across these 2 great spy stories and that are in the book. And they're both about the same thing, which is that you think that it should be easy to spot a spy, and basically it's impossible. All spies, and it's not because the spy is brilliant. Spies are never brilliant. Spies are idiots. Think about it. The most amazing thing about spies is whenever they tell their story, like Aldrich James, who gave away the entire secrets of the CIA to the Soviet Union over the course of 10 years. First of all, the man's an idiot. He's like a terrible, he's like a drunkard. He doesn't even try to disguise. They start paying him money. He doesn't even try to disguise it. He's asking to get caught. And secondly, he gave away, objectively, billions of dollars of secrets. And what did he get in return? A couple $100,000. The man's a moron. If you're going to risk treachery, which has the death sentence in some cases, at least the rest of your life in prison. And if you're going to give it, and if you're smart enough to know anything about where to find these secrets, you should be able to drive a better bargain than that. I mean, the Soviet Union would have paid him $100 million easy for a fraction of the stuff he gave them. Instead, he had enough money to buy a BMW and some Italian suits. These guys are morons. And yet he spied successfully for 10 years before they caught him. And that, I was so fascinated by that fact that, if they're morons, how do they get away with it for so long? And then I realized, we're the problem.
Yeah.
We're just not built to spot liars. And that's what got me doing this book.
So in writing the book, the process of writing it, has it changed how you think and react to strangers? Does it change your decision-making process about whether to trust them?
Oh, yeah. So I've now become this radical skeptic on the value of your initial impressions of strangers. So, for example, I'm this close to giving up on the job interview. I mean, the in-person job interview. I don't understand. What exactly am I supposed to be? Information am I supposed to be gathering from this? I mean, I can see where it would make sense to talk to your previous employer, your previous colleagues. I'd like to hear your answers to certain questions I have, but I mean, do I really think I can make a better decision about you by meeting you face to face? No, all I can see is that that's going to throw me off. I'm going to go down some rabbit hole. I'll make up some story about whether you're likable or whether you're, I can't tell any of that from 45 minutes. So with my last, I actually just started a company with my friend, a podcast company, and I'm trying to push some of my new. I already do this thing where I don't let anyone who's applying for a job, they're not allowed to disclose where they went to school, which is something I talked about in my podcast, because that's irrelevant too. Who cares? I mean, does it somehow? I have a prejudice about one school over another school. That prejudice is based on nothing. Does it really? Does where you went to school tell me anything of value about whether you can do the job I have in front of me? I mean, no. The whole thing's preposterous. Stop. Don't even. So.
Even the way you look.
Oh, and the way you look is it can only serve to, let's face it, we are biased towards attractive people. And so is being attractive at all relevant to the jobs I have in my company? No, it doesn't matter at all. It's completely irrelevant. So why am I gathering up that information? We are massive ageists. I mean, it's irrelevant whether someone is 21 or 61 or 71 with their life. They, you know, there may be a 71-year-old out there who would be amazing. And I tell you right now, if I know your age, I'm not going to hire you for 71. Right? And that is appalling.
So are you out putting this into place at the moment? How's it working? I mean, 'cause as entrepreneurs, you know, one of our biggest challenges, I'm sure I speak for many of us here, is hiring. Because as an entrepreneur, we naturally overrate our own abilities, which means that we think we're good at hiring, and the truth is we're not.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, well, no one's good at hiring. Luckily, I have two advantages. I have my partner, business partner, Jacob, is someone who grew up with a very incredibly intelligent, demanding, domineering mother. Dominating's the wrong word. Complicated but incredibly gifted mother. As a result, his tolerance for like demanding, complicated, incredibly gifted women is infinite. So basically what he does is he just hires incredibly intelligent, super competent women. My company is basically me, Jacob, and like all of these insanely talented women. And so that's fantastic, because women in my experience are way better. They're way easier to work with than men. But the other thing is that the value of knowing about the context in which they work.
yes.
So third-party opinions on people, looking squarely at their performance as opposed to any personal characteristics. That's the kind of stuff which I have been, we're all on the same page. That's what and it's easy in our case because we know we're hiring people to create podcasts for us, and we know the shows people have worked on. We can see the quality of their work. We have people who have long, deep time, you know. So it's an easier. It's not like we're making something. It's harder when, like in your world, sometimes you're engaged in an entirely new field, and it's a lot more difficult to understand whether someone has relevant experiences in a world that didn't exist 10 minutes ago, right?
I just want to say, when I said that I'm not very good at hiring, I've got some of my team members. These are the exceptions, the ones that actually work.
I was going to say, Mike, I don't know why you're saying that right now in front of me. What conclusions did I draw?
We're going to do some rapid fire questions and then open it up if you wouldn't mind, Malcolm.
Yeah.
Some of these questions you'll understand, only you and I will. Marmite or Vegemite?
Oh, Marmite. Not even close.
Democrat or Republican?
Canadian, but I'm Canadian. That's not a good question. I'm Canadian.
That's another question later on. Still or sparkling water? Already know that.
Sparkling.
Favorite vacation destination?
That's impossible to answer. It depends who I'm with.
Give us some examples.
Yeah, like.
Well, this summer I went with my family's half Jamaican, and we gather all the Jamaicans. We go somewhere every year. Last summer we went to Italy with 18 Jamaicans. The largest number of Jamaicans I think that have ever been. The Italians are still recovering. I had a grand time. So, Jamaicans in Italy.
Favorite TV show?
Succession.
Yes.
Wake up time on a Sunday morning?
Well, I don't really have a job. There's no distinction between Sunday and any other day.
You don't have to get defensive, it's just a time.
8:30.
Putin, good or bad?
Oh.
Mushrooms.
Did you say Putin as in Putin of Russia?
Yeah.
Or Poutine?
Oh.
Well, it's actually different. I didn't know you were making a French-Canadian reference.
Mushrooms.
That's like what kind of mushrooms?
Psychedelic mushrooms?
So well, if you want, you can take this anywhere you want. The funny thing is, I wrote 30 of these. I gave them to my assistant. I typed them in, and I said, put them on the cards. He put this one in. I can't stand mushrooms. He added this. Wasn't my question.
I thought this was some like psychedelic. You said, Marin County, wander out in the woods and collect mushrooms question. The answer is no. I'm not going to wander out in the woods and collect mushrooms.
Have you ever done that? Psychedelic
No.
mushrooms? Regular mushrooms? Music, artists you like, excluding the musicians we've got here tonight. Fair.
Well, it's constantly changing. I shade heavily in the country direction.
Nice. Wow.
And so Nashville, that's one of the reasons I love this town so much.
Mm-hmm.
I did a podcast episode of my podcast Broken Record with the Cowboy with the Love Junkies, and the Love Junkies so won my heart that I'm going to say the Love Junkies. They're the most hilarious.
Love Junkies.
You guys know, you should listen to that. If you don't, you should listen to our podcast.
Relaxed or scared about death?
Oh, I don't even think about it. I guess relaxed.
Person you'd like to meet apart from anyone here in this room right now?
Oh wow, that's a monstrously huge and an interesting question. I mean, a million. I mean, the problem is that the people you really want to meet, you don't know that you really want to meet them. So, you know, we have the standard list of like famous, interesting people, but like in my experience, the most interesting people are the people you didn't realize were interesting. And there's a lot of the category. That category is way bigger than the category of people you expect to be interesting, right? So, you know, I guess of the famous people, for some reason I've become obsessed with Maxine Waters. I don't know why. I think it's because my mom is an indomitable black woman of a certain age. And so I'm now increasingly fascinated by these indomitable black women of a certain age who just like, my mom is still like picking fights with the world and winning. And I just find that so hilarious and kind of inspiring. And I feel like Maxine Waters, who's in the same category, she's just been picking fights with the world for 60 years and winning them, a lot of them. And I kind of want to go and, I'm gonna actually, I'm about to call her up and see whether she'll, I can go and see her. And I want to sort of put a tape recorder down in front and just talk to her for like as many hours as she'll let me talk to her. I just find the whole thing of like, her whole story, I don't know if you know her story, is fantastic. It's like, and she's been witness to every bizarre thing that's happened in LA over the last 50 years. She is somehow in the middle of it. I just find that amazing. She was like a poor girl from St. Louis who comes to LA in the 60s to work in the garment industry. You know, and she's living in South Central and she gets radicalized. It's like, and the rest is history, you know, it's kind of great.
Thank you.
How about somebody that's no longer alive?
Oh, wow. Well, now you've multiplied the number of available options dramatically. I guess, well, it would be a family member. I had a great-grandmother who I knew, who died when I was about 6, and who was an extraordinary character, I'm told, and I would love to just chat with her at length.
Brexit, good or bad?
Well, I have complicated feelings about this. Do you mind if I take a little longer?
Take your time.
Let's suppose you're Theresa May. This vote has happened. The British people say they want a Brexit. They don't really, no one's actually described what that means. What it entails, what the consequences are, who wins, who loses. The smart thing to do would be, okay, you've now voted. Let's now figure out what Brexit's about. I'm going to create a commission, put lots of smart people on it. They're going to come back to us in 2 years with a long report that says this is what Brexit would mean for England. This is how we would do it if we were going to do it. And then I'm going to put that report before the British people and I'm going to say, are you still in favor of it? That everyone in this room, if they were Prime Minister of England, would have done that. There's no one in any with half a brain who wouldn't do that. Like, if someone gives you an idea like that, what is your first question? Your first question is, okay, let's figure out whether we can do it or not, right? For some reason, I don't understand, this person who was entrusted with massive responsibility for the country of England decided, oh, okay then, and then just ran off and tried to pull it off overnight. Like, this is the most moronic behavior. This has nothing to do with your pro or anti. Who does this?
He was British.
No, it's like the most moronic. I've never heard of anything so stupid in my life. Like, from the very beginning, I was like, what are you doing? Like, I need to know what it means before I even go any further here. And by the way, you know, maybe you come back and you discover, oh, 60% of 70% of the economists in England think that there's massive upside, in which case, I'm gung-ho. Or they come back and say, you're going to destroy the automotive industry. In which case I'm like, oh, well, maybe I don't want to do this, right? I need to know that.
That was my assistant's question as well. I'll let him know that was a good one. Democratic nomination will be not who you want, who it will be.
Oh. Well, can I answer who I want?
Sure. You can do what you want.
This is my favorite story about the Democratic nomination. Kamala Harris, her dad, Donald Harris, Jamaican. So once I learned that, I'm like, oh. So I email him, and I say, dear Mr. Professor Harris, he's a professor at Stanford, right, economics. I'm like, you're Jamaican? My family's Jamaican. And not only that, he grew up in a town called Brownstown, which is where my mother went to school in Brownstown. And they're about the same age, Donald Harris and my mom. So I was like, I just thought I'd, shout out, whatever, we have some stuff in common. He emails back and says, first of all, your mom went to the church that my father started in Brownstown. And I didn't know her, but I would have seen her. I mean, clearly we're in church at the same time, right? I said, not only that, but I went to the University of West Indies in the late 50s. And when I got there, I didn't know what I wanted to study. And so I went to a professor, and I said, what should I study? And I had a long conversation, and the professor said, you should study math. Because I studied math, I went into economics, and because I went into economics, I had my career, and now I'm a professor at Stanford. Who was the professor who told me to do this? Your dad. My dad spent 3 years as a professor at the University of West Indies. So I'm like, if she wins, I'm going to argue that it doesn't happen without the Gladwells. If my dad doesn't say go into math, he doesn't become an economist. He doesn't become an economist. He doesn't move to America. He doesn't move to America. He doesn't meet Kamala's mom. He doesn't meet Kamala's mom. No Kamala. Right? So if she wins and I'm not on the dais at inauguration, I'm very upset. And me and my mom are like,
I think you deserve a senior position in the government.
I do. I don't know if she knows. I don't know if she knows this story. I'm a little concerned she's not doing better because I really want this to happen. But okay. So who do I think will win?
Yeah.
I mean, here's the other thing I'll say. This is in keeping with my earlier comment. I actually think that any of them could win. And all of them would be good presidents, although in different ways.
Sure.
Right? I mean, there's this fiction we have that there's a good one and there's a bad one. Actually, they all seem to be pretty decent, well-motivated, well-meaning people. And in most elections, some elections, most of the candidates do fit that. I'd be happy with 90% of the people who've run for president over the last 30 years.
You and I would do better, but that's a whole nother. We can't. Favorite Malcolm Gladwell book? Trudeau or Trump? You don't need to answer that one. Hong Kong.
Hong Kong? This NBA thing is, I don't know how many people are NBA fans. So China flips out because some guy, but like one of 100 executives in the NBA tweets, and China's like, ooh. These guys have got to simmer down. So what? Like, what? Do they really need to? I mean, are they that sensitive? Why are you taking it off?
I'm just trying to be selective at this point.
I would never have thought that the second biggest country in the world would be so powerful country in the world would be so touchy over Twitter. Why are they even following Twitter? Who spends that much time on Twitter?
Right, not me.
Yeah.
Legal in China.
Football, Southampton or Portsmouth?
I'm not a football.
Predators hockey team, best or not?
Well, you're asking a Canadian, so I can't be back.
Glad you came here tonight, yes or no?
Delighted.
All right, I think the rest of these would get a favourite restaurant in New York. Mine's Mayolina.
Oh, interesting. Not a bad choice.
Thank you. I was worried when you said that.
Do I have a favourite restaurant? I do. There's too many to choose from.
will humanity prevail? Are we coming to the end? Are we going to self-destruct?
No, I think we're going to figure it out at the last moment. We're going to pull a rabbit out of the hat. It's going to be a little bit painful, particularly when everything starts to melt. But I feel you'll be fine in Nashville. You're inland.
We're not a major target. It's great. Yeah. Malcolm, you've been very generous in taking a phone call from me 10, 12 years ago, and then coming along tonight and giving your time. Thank you. Just one more thing, just before we kind of open it up here, if I can. The RAND Corporation. I know you're a supporter of the RAND Corporation. Can you share with us just a little bit about the work there and what you like it?
So I am on the board of the RAND Corporation. The premier nonprofit research organization probably in the world. It is the most fascinating experience because what it is a group of very, 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 very smart people who approach problems with as close to objectivity as you can approach problems. So they are, in energy. Their fields are energy, education, military, health. Those are the kind of major areas of specialty, and they just produce incredibly thoughtful research. One of the rules is, no matter who they're working for, the findings have to be publicly available, with some minor exceptions in the case of the military. Right. And that is another thing. They're just an insane. Anyway, I'm a huge. That's why I joined the board, and why I was so grateful for you for allowing me to contribute my to
Sure.
Yeah.
But I often make a minuscule donation to the RAND Corporation, which is really very small and irrelevant in terms of some of your financial success. But you came anyway to meet a room full of strangers.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it'd be fun. You seem to be a very nice person. I've had dealings with you before. These are enjoyable, and also you have to remember, quite apart from this, I thought this would be fun. It has so far been very, very fun. But also remember that I'm in the business of finding out what's interesting in the world, and that involves meeting interesting people. And so I love doing these kinds of things because I find out stuff, and that's why I'm one of the number of reasons why I like to come.
Well, thank you, Malcolm. Let's go around and get a few questions. If you can say your name, any affiliation, or a favourite sports team or business you're with, or something like that for the fun of it. And then please remember, the question shouldn't be a speech in itself. Make the question pretty brief so we can listen to Malcolm. Stephen, you put your hand up. Hello, how are you? Good to see you.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Malcolm Stephen Salyers. Question. I believe, like all lives are here to give a lesson or be part of a lesson. I'm a big fan of you, but also a big fan of Broken Record. When I mentioned these three names, what do you think the lesson they're here to teach us, or the lesson we're here to be a part of in the world, just in general? Michael Jackson, R. Kelly, Ryan Adams.
Oh, wow. Well, they are all useful reminders that there is a big difference between someone's individual genius and their strength of character. And we can't confuse those two things. And I think that cuts both ways. One is that we cannot give people who are geniuses passes. We can't just assume that they're, that allows them to, gives them the right to behave as they choose. But at the same time as well, it cuts the other way, that because I like someone's art does not mean I am endorsing their choices and their behavior. It should be fine to express disgust at someone's conduct and at the same time appreciate their art. I don't feel that's a contradiction. I feel that is just recognizing the complexity of human beings.
Thank you.
Buddy.
My name's Buddy Teaster. How do you think about knowing if you're wrong? You seem to have a good track record of saying where things are going, but how do you change your mind?
Oh wow, that's so I'm obsessed with changing my mind. I love change. I think nothing is more useful than having an opportunity to say I was wrong. And as we were talking about earlier, that I think you learn way more from your mistakes than from your successes. And so whenever I can identify a mistake, I'm kind of excited by it. One thing so there are several sort of associated things. The world needs to be forgiving, though, of people who make mistakes, as long as they are willing to own up to them. That's one thing. We're like I was noticing today, a colleague of mine at the New Yorker, a guy named Jeff Toobin, who writes about, he tweeted today that after the State Department came out with its final report on Hillary's emails, exonerating her, he tweeted an apology saying, "I apologize for making way too much out of this case at the time." And so I then read through the responses, and I wanted to see how many people accepted his apology in graciously, and how many people took the opportunity to take another whack at him. And a surprising number of people took the opportunity to take another whack at him. And if you do that, then people won't apologize anymore, and they'll find it harder to change their minds. A lot of times it's fear of the way we're going to be treated that prohibits people from being humble and accepting the fact that they're flawed. They keep up their appearances because they're scared. And so I think we have to accept the fact that people make mistakes, and it's fine to say, I made a mistake. And as long as we think that there's genuine attempt to learn from it, we should allow people, give them that opportunity. So there's two sides to that, and I feel all of us have to hold up the other side of the bargain if we want people to engage in this behavior.
Thank you.
So David, just for the fun of it, changing your mind, when I first asked Malcolm if he would come, he said no. And then I kept going, and here he is. So thank you. I appreciate you changing your mind. Thank you very much. David.
Yeah, David Fischette. Clearly, as a writer, you're an outlier. Do you consider yourself an outlier in any other area, and if so, what would that be?
Oh, I'm not sure as a writer I'm an outlier, but do I? I mean, I flatter myself that I'm a really good runner for my age, but that's just pure narcissism. I'm actually injured right now, so I can't even run. So, but that's the only thing that I permit myself, that indulgence. It's generally not a good idea, I think, to go around trumpeting to yourself your own extraordinary abilities, because generally speaking, you're not as extraordinary as you think you are. So yeah, I don't think I have any other special abilities.
And why did you change your mind, Cal?
Oh, well, because I didn't think initially that I would have time when I was here, because I only have the dimmest grasp on my calendar. And then I was like, oh, I should look at the calendar before I say that. And then I looked at my calendar and was like, oh, actually, I do have time. It works perfectly, in fact, so I emailed back. But my assistant, she's a lovely person, but she has one major, and I can't get her to stop doing this. She'll only give me, she controls my calendar, but she only gives it to me one day at a time. So I have no idea what can you tell me? And she just won't give it up. So I have no idea. I don't know.
One of those controlling females that you're talking about.
It's not controlling. It's that she doesn't want to give it up until it's perfect. And I was like, well, you could be imperfect. You could still work with it. But
Brett.
Brett Crowley. I'm fascinated with the idea of the 10,000 hours, and I know that you've said in the past that you put in 10,000 hours at the Washington Post. My question is, how did you get the job to start your career at the Washington Post? What steps got you going?
Well, I got very lucky. First of all, I was hired at the Washington Post in 1987, which is significant because that was the high water mark of newspaper profits. Newspapers were about as profitable as any industry in America in the mid-'80s. And so they had so much money, they were basically hiring everyone. They the doors were basically wide open, and I wandered in. I had no experience. To this day, I can't figure out why they would have. A guy named Frank hired me, and Frank, literally, when I asked him, why are you hiring me, he said, Frank, but I got hired on the business desk. And the business desk in 1987 of the Washington Post was where they put people who couldn't do anything else. Like, because nobody cares. Washington, who cares about business in Washington? No one did. So that, I was hired on the low, I was the, it was the last one in. Which is not and I was reminded of this fact. My college that I went to had, which was Trinity College at the University of Toronto. Basically everyone who came in lived in residence. And the residences had all been constructed at different times and had hugely variable levels of quality. And so they were hierarchical. And most of the freshmen were in single rooms, but there were also a few double rooms so they let you in. You could tell if you were the first person in, because you got the best room for a freshman, and the second best person got the second best. The rooms were that clearly hierarchical. Anyway, I showed up late because I had some medical problem, and as I came to my room in the first day of freshman year at University of Trinity College, I realized not only was I in the worst double, but I was in the worst double of the double, like the Bruce bed of the double. So I was the last one in. So I've often remembered that. And then I went to the Washington Post, and it was clear to me I was like being hired for the lowest, least prestigious job in the newspaper, which was covering local healthcare for the business page, running for the Monday supplement, which is like so at the bottom. Anyway, that's how I got hired. I was the last guy in. They were rolling the dice.
Jen, was that a hand going up? I certainly saw Chris's. Okay, Chris.
Chris Bentley, what criticism of your past work did you find most interesting?
What criticism do I find most interesting? Oh man, that's interesting. I kind of stopped reading some of the criticism. Well, I get two criticisms. One is that my work restates the obvious, and the second criticism is that my work is so far-fetched that I can only support it by cherry-picking evidence. But often these criticisms, which are, by the way, contradictory, right? Why would I cherry-pick if I'm restating the obvious? If I'm restating the obvious, how can I be making it? They're often made simultaneously, which I find very puzzling. So how can I be doing both? Which is it? So that's not an interesting criticism.
Jealousy.
No, I don't know if there's that much. I do think, I have been encouraged. So I got some criticism after my first book's discussion of crime. That the criticism was essentially that I had insufficiently understood the complexity of crime, and I had insufficiently understood the downside of aggressive policing. And I've spent in 3 out of my 4 subsequent books, I have large discussions of crime where I've attempted to kind of respond and learn from that criticism. So that was a very interesting, that really made me rethink my position. And I've spent in the 20 years since Tipping Point came out, I have been revisiting that issue of policing, what effective policing looks like, largely in response to the criticism I got from my first book.
Charlene, Chris, those will be the last 2 if we can.
Hi, I'm Charlene Geralds, and when Tipping Point came out, I was an executive at Walmart, and it became mandatory reading for all management. So I think that we bought about 25,000
Oh my
books.
God. Thank you.
But I was wondering if there was one point in your career that you could point to that may have been one of your proudest moments. Was it the release of your first book and it being so well? I'll shut up.
No,
You say.
I'll tell you what my proudest moment is. When you, and I'm going to warn you, this is a massive name dropping thing. So sometimes when you get a phone call, it says unknown ID or right. That's like you may not know there's a level above that, which is when someone's calling you from like a black phone, and it's just like gibberish, like something. So one day I looked at my phone and it's like What do I hear? I hear, Malcolm? I go, yeah. Barack Obama. Does that? I got a call on my cell phone from Barack Obama. You tell me what's better than that.
And that someone wasn't calling for him. That he gave
Right.
Just Barack calling.
What did he say?
What did I say?
No,
What did
he
he
said.
He
say?
said.
What did he want?
He wanted to say, he said, Michelle and I just listened to, this episode of Revisionist History. We loved it.
No.
It was fantastic.
Congratulations.
Chris, please.
Chris Middlestad. You talked about coming out of your book as becoming more skeptical, and I was wondering what impact you think that has for kindness, as it seems like we're a very skeptical environment, culture
Yeah.
these days.
Well, I thought a lot about this. It's a really good question. I would say that it has enormous implications in a positive way for kindness. Because withholding judgment about people is what permits you to be empathetic. So the thing about empathy is that the desire to look at something through someone else's eyes only works if it's universal. So it doesn't work if I'm selective and I say, oh, I kind of like you, and so that encourages me to look at things through your eyes. That's not empathy. Empathy is where I confer that benefit on absolutely everyone, regardless of whatever negative impression I might have of them. That's what it is. And the only way you can do that, the only way you can get there is if you withhold judgment in cases where you desperately want to reject someone or be negative towards them or hate them, or before you do any of those things, you have to stop, put yourself, and then and affirmatively grant the universal gift of empathy. I would like to think it has helped to make me a better person to do that.
So, last question, if I may, Malcolm. That's the world changes. You can no longer, for some reason, be an author, a writer, and a podcaster. What's your new career going to be? Or, alternative question, if you prefer, if you hadn't have taken the career you did, what career would you have taken?
Same answer.
And you can't be in the headset business. That's gone.
People always find this curious, although I find it makes total sense. I really wanted to be a real estate developer.
Wow.
I just think the idea of building stuff and seeing the thing that you build, and shaping the kind of physical environment in that way is just an incredibly thrilling and rewarding thing. And also the problem that building something presents, which is juggling 1,000 different variables that change every day. It's just so fascinating. It's like I have such incredible awe for people and each building is a different problem, right? You have to start all over again. Like that idea of there's no such thing as, there's no copycat. You can't learn it and then you're done. Every part about it strikes me as being infinitely fascinating.
Fortunately, I think you've still got some more runway in the writing and podcast industry. So builders, it's okay, Malcolm's not going to be there yet. You've been very kind, gracious, and generous in taking a phone call from me 10, 12 years ago and coming here tonight and sharing your time, Malcolm. Thank you. So I wondered, what would be a better gift to someone than, of course, a telephone headset? I know it's what you've always wanted. So,
no, this is enormously exciting. I would expect nothing less.
And please stay around if you can. I know you said you needed to be early because you're early at Belmont University tomorrow, but please hang around if you like and talk. We've got some music continuing here. And let's just say thank you, Malcolm.